So none of this is new. Throughout church history, these ideas have emerged again and again. They are old pagan dogmas that are just recycled as new and edgy ideas dressed up in modern garb and given a Christian makeover. Friends, I got a great video for you today, but before we get into that, I want to show you my new book, Another Gospel, A Lifelong Christian Seeks Truth in Response to Progressive Christianity. It's coming out very soon, and I want to let you know about a couple of bonuses you can claim if you pre-order the book. So if you've already pre-ordered the book, you're getting the bonuses. If you pre-order between now and October 6th at midnight, you're getting the bonuses, which are, number one, you're going to get the first 2 chapters of the book a week early. And number 2, you're going to be eligible to join a special private Facebook book club group led by me, where we will take 6 weeks to read through the book together. And at the end of each week, I'll do a Facebook Live in that group where I'll teach through the chapters we read. I'll take your questions. We'll have a great discussion. So if this sounds great to you, if you want to be a part of that, go to alisachilders.com/anothergospel, and you can click a link to pre-order on all kinds of different platforms. Then below that, there's a link to click where you'll fill out a form with your receipt number, and you'll get to be a part of the Facebook group, and you'll get those 2 chapters early. I would really love for you to be a part of this. So please go to alisachilders.com/anothergospel, pre-order, and join us on Facebook. It's going to be fun. What comes to mind when you think of the phrase New Age? Well, if you're an 80s baby like me, you might remember documentaries of hippies experimenting with LSD at Woodstock. Or maybe you remember Shirley MacLaine being featured on the cover of Time magazine holding a cluster of crystals. If you're a 90s kid, you might remember Deepak Chopra teaching Oprah how to move things with her mind. Well, as old or out of touch as some of these images and ideas may seem, New Age beliefs have not gone anywhere. In fact, they've permeated our culture more than ever. But they have a slick new image. So the psychic hotline of the 80s has been replaced by winsome, hipster, self-help gurus who often translate these Eastern religious ideas into Christianese. Many Christians aren't even aware of how New Age beliefs have permeated the church through the vehicle of progressive Christianity. I've written about progressive Christianity quite a bit, but it wasn't until I did research for a chapter I wrote for the Mama Bear Apologetics book about New Age and New Spirituality that I realized how much these 2 belief systems have in common. So here are 5 ways that progressive Christianity and New Age spirituality are kind of the same thing. Number 1, there's a redefinition or just an abandonment of the concept of sin. New Agers believe that all people are inherently divine, that we all have this spark of divinity inside of us, and that there's no such thing called sin, but only the failure to remember or to acknowledge our divinity. In her masterclass on the Oprah and Friends Network in 2008, New Age leader Marianne Williamson led countless Americans through the book A Course in Miracles. In this class, participants were encouraged to affirm statements like this: there is no sin. They were taught the atonement is the final lesson that we need to learn because it teaches that not only have we never sinned, but we have no need of salvation. And all of this information supposedly came from Jesus himself. Well, several years ago, I heard a progressive pastor teach on Genesis 3, the famous passage in which Eve was tricked by the serpent into eating the forbidden fruit. And even though he didn't believe that this was an actual historical fact, he was unpacking the moral truth that we could all learn from the creation story. He made the point that when this first couple took that fateful bite in the garden, that it was actually their shame, not their sin, that separated them from God. So in other words, they failed to recognize their belovedness, their inherent goodness and worth. So according to this view, if they were separated from God, it was them who were distant, not God. Progressive writer Brian McLaren describes it this way. He says they lose their fearlessness in relation to God. So notice the similarity of language there. Without original sin, we are all good, and we're only distant from God in our own minds when we forget that. The second thing that progressive Christianity and New Age spirituality have in common is a denial of absolute truth. So New Age thought is marked by its relativism. There's a rejection of objective morality and objective truth. So if something feels true to you, it's true. If it feels right to you, it's right. If something feels real to you, it's reality. In other words, your own thoughts and feelings are your authority for what is true and real. Well, one distinctive feature of progressive Christianity is its denial of biblical authority. Of course, no one operates without an authority. If you remove one authority, you're going to replace it with another. So typically in progressive Christianity, the authority for what someone believes is true shifts from the Bible to themselves by becoming their own moral compass, which will inevitably ebb and flow with culture. The third thing that progressive Christianity and New Age beliefs have in common is this acceptance of Jesus, but a denial of his blood atonement. So, New Age thought leaders almost always couch their teachings in Christian language. Jesus is an example of someone who attained enlightenment by connecting with the divine. He's an example that any of us can follow. His death wasn't a saving act, but the saving comes from within ourselves when we realize that we have the same capabilities as Jesus already within us. So this is often referred to as Christ consciousness. This is why many New Agers see no contradiction in reciting the Lord's Prayer while believing in karma and the healing power of crystals. Of course, this is an outright denial of his atoning death and resurrection. Many progressive Christians also deny the blood atonement of Jesus. In his controversial book, Love Wins, Rob Bell refers to this idea as something Christians simply picked up from surrounding cultures and used to explain the death of Jesus. In a 2016 lecture explaining the Eucharist, which is communion for us Protestants, Bell joked about the ridiculousness of atonement theory, summing it up as, quote, "God is less grumpy because of Jesus," end quote. Well, this gave the audience a good laugh, and Bell went on to explain that the real reason we pass the bread and the wine is to, quote, heighten our senses to our bonds with our brothers and our sisters in our shared humanity. Many progressive Christian leaders have popularized the phrase cosmic child abuse, a term first coined by Steve Chalk to protest the idea that a loving God would require the blood sacrifice for the sin of mankind. The fourth thing that progressive Christians and New Agers have in common is this idea that it's all about me. So New Age thought revolves around the self with a capital S. Self-empowerment and realization of our innate divinity are central to its teachings and practices. According to New Age blogger Kaylee Brown, when Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life" in John 14:6, this me that Jesus referred to isn't himself, but rather this self within you. A Course in Miracles also asks the participants to affirm this, quote, "My salvation comes from me," end quote. And if we're all divine, why shouldn't it be all about us? Well, the typical progressive Christian will probably not agree that it's all about them. In fact, they tend to be very focused on social justice, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a theological shift. Progressive favorite Richard Rohr even goes so far to write that each of us, and sometimes creation, is the fourth member of the Blessed Trinity, implying that the fullness of God isn't complete until we become part of it. So generally speaking, the concept of sin is abandoned or redefined, truth becomes relativized, and a mere martyr's cross gives us a more palatable Jesus who's a great moral teacher, moral example, and doting best friend forever, but not the all-powerful warrior king who will one day return in a blood-dipped robe to judge the living and the dead. The fifth belief that New Age belief and progressive Christianity has in common is Universalism. So former New Ager and now Christian believer Stephen Bankhartz noted that New Age proponents affirm the idea that all roads lead to God. He wrote, "The New Age movement holds tightly to religious pluralism and universalism, which is a view that all religions are inspired by a common source, and they all point to the same truth that we will one day reach regardless of what path we choose to get there." So many progressive Christian authors affirm some sort of universalism, either implicitly by denying the concept of a literal hell, or explicitly by declaring that all people will be reconciled to God regardless of their beliefs or religious practices. The concept of universal reconciliation, that Jesus will reconcile all sinners to himself, was smuggled into the mainstream consciousness of the evangelical church through the wildly popular 2007 book, The Shack. Years later, its author, William Paul Young, confirmed his intention in his book, Lies We Believe About God. He wrote this, quote, "Are you suggesting that everyone is saved, that you believe in universal salvation? That is exactly what I am saying," end quote. So none of this is new. Throughout church history, these ideas have emerged again and again. They are old pagan dogmas that are just recycled as new and edgy ideas dressed up in modern garb and given a Christian makeover. Trevin Wax put it perfectly on Twitter. He wrote this: "One of the insufferable aspects of heretics and heresies is how boring, predictable, and recycled they are. Orthodoxy is thrilling in its holding together of paradox and mystery. Heresies are narrow because they're tailored to their times." Progressive Christians may think they're being cutting edge and relevant by stepping outside the bounds of orthodoxy, but in reality, they're simply falling for the ideology that has kickstarted every false religion since the fall of man. Romans 1:25, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator. And it's no less damning if the creature in question is yourself.